There comes a time in a woman's life, often around the age of 40, when something ancient stirs within her. It is not madness, though to the untrained eye it may appear so. It is not rebellion, though the world may brand it as such. It is, in truth, the awakening of a long-silenced self. For decades she has lived under layers: wife, mother, daughter, caretaker, professional, each role noble, yet each demanding a piece of her soul. She has smiled when she wanted to scream. She has loved when she felt empty. She has served when she longed to create. And one day, often without warning, the mask begins to crack. The life she built, the one society praised her for, starts to feel like a costume she can no longer bear to wear. People around her whisper, "She's changing." Some say she's losing her mind. But in truth, she is finding it. She is hearing, perhaps for the first time since childhood, the faint but insistent voice of her true nature, calling from the depths. The Jungians call this the confrontation with the shadow, the encounter with the parts of the psyche that have been repressed, denied, or sacrificed in service to others. At 40, the psyche demands balance. The woman who has lived only as the nurturer, the giver, must now face her own hunger. The woman who has lived for order must now meet her chaos. The one who has lived by duty must now discover desire. And when she refuses this inner summons, when she tries to keep the peace at all costs, her soul revolts. It manifests as restlessness, rage, depression, or a wild urge to destroy what no longer feels authentic. This is why families sometimes shatter, not because she wants destruction, but because she can no longer survive in an identity that denies her wholeness. To the world she seems to be going crazy, but what she is truly doing is dismantling the false self. It is the death of who she was supposed to be, so that the woman she is can finally breathe. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, and this is the pain of awakening." The woman over 40 begins to see that her life, though outwardly full, may have been lived in exile from her own soul, and so she steps into the terrifying unknown, to reclaim herself, to speak truth instead of comfort, to choose freedom over approval. Do not call her crazy. Call her courageous, for she is walking through fire that few dare face. She is doing what the world fears most, becoming whole. And when she emerges, she does not return as the woman she once was. She returns as the embodiment of her own truth, strong, grounded, unshakable. She no longer needs permission to exist. There comes a point in a woman's life, often somewhere around 40, when something deep and unrelenting begins to stir inside her. It is not new, though it may feel sudden. It is the voice of the self she buried long ago beneath the demands of love, motherhood, partnership, career, and expectation. For decades, she has played her roles with care and devotion, and society has applauded her for it. She has been dependable, graceful, nurturing, but behind the well-composed exterior, another part of her has been quietly watching, waiting and growing restless. When this part finally awakens, it can feel like madness, but it is in truth the psyche's attempt at liberation. The human psyche, as Jung taught, is not static. It is a living, evolving field of energy, always striving for wholeness. For a woman, the early half of life is often spent in service to adaptation, building identity in relation to others. She learns to be desirable, responsible, accommodating. She shapes herself around the needs of her environment, often at the expense of her instinctual self. The erotic, creative, wild elements of her being are subdued, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of fear. But these forces do not vanish. They retreat into the unconscious, waiting for the moment when repression becomes unbearable. At midlife, the psyche calls in its debts. What was denied must now be faced. The buried passions, the unlived dreams, the truths she swallowed to keep the peace all rise to the surface. The woman begins to feel an unnameable dissatisfaction. She may look around at her life, her family, her home, her career, and realize that what once gave her meaning now feels strangely hollow. This is the awakening of the repressed self, the soul's refusal to remain silent. And yet the world rarely greets this awakening with understanding. People say she is ungrateful, restless, unstable. They interpret her longing as selfishness or moral failure. But from a psychological perspective, she is experiencing one of the most natural and necessary transitions of human development. The so-called madness is an eruption of vitality, the life force reclaiming its rightful territory. The woman is not falling apart. She is breaking open. This awakening has a sexual dimension as well. Sexuality in its deepest sense is not merely about physical desire, but about life energy itself, the libido as Jung described it. For many women, midlife marks the return of this energy in its raw form. It can be disorienting. The libido, long directed toward nurturing others, turns inward, demanding to be expressed through creativity, exploration, or intimacy that feels authentic rather than dutiful. The woman may find herself yearning not just for love, but for aliveness, for the kind of connection that mirrors her own depth. Philosophically, this stage represents a confrontation between being and becoming. The woman begins to sense that she has been living according to a script written by others, a script that rewarded compliance and punished authenticity. She feels, perhaps for the first time, the existential weight of her own freedom. What does she truly want? Who is she when no one is watching? These are not small questions. They are the questions that tear down and rebuild lives. The awakening of the repressed self is, therefore, both destructive and creative. It dismantles illusions. It exposes the emptiness of roles that once felt sacred. But in the rubble of those identities, something extraordinary happens. The authentic self begins to breathe. This is the woman's first real dialogue with her soul. It is painful, yes, but it is also profoundly redemptive. When a woman at 40 seems to go crazy, she is not succumbing to instability. She is responding to a deeper order of truth. The psyche can no longer tolerate falseness. The structures that kept her contained, marriage, family, societal expectations, begin to tremble because they were built around a partial version of her being. Now the whole woman demands to live, and that demand, though it may disrupt the familiar, is an act of extraordinary courage. So when we see a woman in this storm, we should not rush to pathologize her. We should recognize what is truly happening, the reawakening of instinct, passion, and purpose. The return of the feminine principle that has been denied for too long. She is not breaking down, she is breaking through. When the repressed self begins to awaken, it does not rise alone, it brings with it a host of shadows. These are the unlived lives, the unspoken words, the forbidden desires that have lingered in the corners of a woman's psyche, waiting for acknowledgement. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, and it is perhaps the most demanding yet liberating stage of individuation. It is the moment when a woman can no longer pretend that the darkness within her does not exist. The shadow is not evil. It is simply everything that has been exiled from consciousness in order to be loved, accepted, or safe. For many women, the first half of life is spent constructing a self that fits the social order, a self that is pleasing, responsible, generous, and emotionally available. But this adaptation requires sacrifice. To be good, she must suppress her anger. To be desirable, she must deny her aggression or power. To be stable, she must hide her chaos, her doubts, her erotic curiosity. Each act of denial pushes part of her deeper into the unconscious, where it gathers energy and waits. The shadow grows not as a monster, but as a truth unacknowledged. At midlife, the balance of the psyche shifts. The structures that once held her together begin to loosen, and the shadow seizes its chance to emerge. It might appear in dreams as a wild, untamed figure, or in behavior that surprises even her. She may say things she once would have swallowed, feel desires she thought she had outgrown, or express rage she was taught to conceal. These eruptions can frighten her and those around her, yet they are signs of psychic growth, not decay. Jung understood that the shadow is not the enemy, but the key to wholeness. To confront it is to reclaim power. When a woman faces her anger, she discovers strength. When she acknowledges envy, she recognizes her own hunger for creation. When she admits her sexual longing, she reconnects to vitality. Each shadow aspect holds a fragment of her soul, energy that once integrated makes her more complete. But integration requires honesty, and honesty is often the first casualty of a life lived to please others. This confrontation has profound sexual implications as well. Many women over 40 experience a sudden surge of erotic energy, not directed solely at another person, but as a return of their own life force. Sexuality in the Jungian sense is symbolic. It represents the union of opposites, the merging of conscious and unconscious. When the shadow rises, it often carries with it forbidden or unfulfilled desires. Society may label this awakening scandalous or irrational, but psychologically it is sacred. It is the psyche's way of restoring balance between repression and expression. To meet the shadow also means facing one's darker motives, the jealousy, resentment, or need for control that were once denied. These emotions can shatter her idealized image of herself as endlessly patient or selfless. Yet, paradoxically, it is through accepting her flaws that she becomes truly moral. Morality that depends on denial is brittle. Morality born of self-knowledge is resilient. When a woman accepts that she is capable of both light and darkness, she ceases to judge herself or others through the lens of perfection. She becomes real. Philosophically, the shadow confrontation is the soul's demand for authenticity. It tears through illusion and asks, "Who am I beneath my virtues?" It exposes that much of what we call goodness is often compliance with the collective, not an expression of genuine integrity. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That is the essence of this passage in a woman's life. It is not about chasing happiness, it is about confronting truth. Of course, this process threatens the family system. When a woman begins to speak uncomfortable truths, those around her may resist. The shadow does not only belong to her, it belongs to the collective she inhabits. Her awakening forces others to face their own denied parts, and that can be terrifying. What looks like a personal crisis is, in fact, a systemic one, the breakdown of illusion within a shared reality. And yet, if she dares to stay with this darkness, to neither run from it nor be consumed by it, something miraculous happens. She begins to integrate. Her emotions become guides rather than enemies. Her sexuality becomes a source of wisdom rather than shame. Her anger transforms into clarity. The shadow once feared becomes an ally. She is no longer fragmented between the woman she shows the world and the one she hides in silence. She becomes whole. This confrontation is not easy. It asks for courage greater than conformity. But in meeting the shadow, a woman discovers that what she feared most was never darkness itself. It was her own magnitude. And so, the next time you see a woman standing in her midlife storm, don't mistake her fire for madness. Understand that she is in conversation with her shadow, and through that dialogue, she is becoming real. The light you see burning through her chaos is not destruction, it is transformation. There comes a moment in this inner evolution when the illusions that once held life together begin to crumble. The woman who has awakened her repressed self and faced her shadow starts to see with painful clarity the architecture of her existence, the roles, the routines, the identities she has built and defended for decades. And suddenly, what once felt solid begins to feel hollow. The life she has so carefully constructed no longer fits her expanding consciousness. It's as if she has been living inside a beautifully decorated house that she now realizes was never truly hers. This collapse of false identities is one of the most misunderstood experiences in a woman's life. To the outside world, it may look like she is rejecting everything: her marriage, her work, her friendships, even her faith. But what she is really rejecting is falseness, the inauthentic self that has been performing in order to be loved and accepted. She begins to recognize that much of what she called duty was actually fear, and much of what she called love was often self-erasure. This realization is not comfortable. It is the tearing away of illusion, and like any tearing, it hurts. Jung taught that the first half of life is devoted to building the persona, the mask that allows us to function within society. We learn who we are supposed to be, how to behave, how to earn approval. For women, that persona is often woven from sacrifice and service. It is shaped by centuries of conditioning that equates goodness with self-denial. But the second half of life, Jung said, is about individuation, the process of reclaiming the self that exists beyond the mask. And individuation always begins with collapse, because one cannot be reborn while clinging to what is false. When this collapse begins, the woman may experience profound confusion. She wonders, who am I if I am not the one who pleases, who fixes, who smooths things over? She may look at her partner and realize that she has been playing a role more than living a relationship. She may question the career that once seemed meaningful and see that it was built more on survival than passion. Even her body begins to participate in this awakening. The hormonal shifts of midlife, those changes so often pathologized as imbalance, are in fact the body's way of stripping away the old narrative. The body, the psyche, and the soul begin to align in their insistence on truth. This stage also carries a profound sexual and creative undercurrent. When the persona collapses, the life energy that was trapped in maintaining appearances is suddenly freed. Many women find themselves filled with new desires, not just for erotic fulfillment, but for expression, for art, writing, movement, or solitude. What the world may interpret as restlessness is actually the soul seeking new form. She no longer wants to perform. She wants to be. She no longer wants to please. She wants to live. But this liberation often threatens the structures around her. Family systems depend on predictability. When the woman who always said yes begins to say no, those who relied on her compliance feel betrayed. When she stops pretending to be content, the mirror she held up for others shatters. In truth, she is not breaking the family apart. She is breaking the illusion that the family was whole when she was half alive. Her authenticity exposes the imbalance that has been there all along. Philosophically, this collapse of identity is the death required for rebirth. Every spiritual tradition speaks of it. The dark night of the soul, the descent into the underworld, the stripping of the ego. Jung viewed it not as failure but as initiation. The woman is being initiated into her own wholeness. The loss of certainty, the grief, the loneliness, all of it is the psychic labor of transformation. Out of the ashes of the false self emerges a consciousness that no longer seeks validation from the outside world, but finds meaning from within. To live through this stage requires immense courage. It demands that a woman trust what she feels, even when the world calls her irrational. It requires her to walk away from identities that once defined her, even when they still bring her praise. It asks her to surrender the comfort of belonging in exchange for the truth of becoming. But once she crosses this threshold, she can never go back. She has seen too much. She knows now that peace built on pretense is not peace at all. It is quiet suffocation. The collapse of the false identity is not destruction. It is liberation. The woman who dares to let her old self die discovers something unshakable beneath the rubble. Her essence untouched by time, untouched by expectation. This is the beginning of true freedom, the moment she stops living as a reflection of others and starts living as the embodiment of her own soul. And so, when you see a woman dismantling her old life, do not pity her. Do not rush to fix her or lead her back to what she has outgrown. Understand that she is in sacred territory, the threshold between death and rebirth. She is not losing herself. She is finally meeting herself, because only when the mask falls can the face beneath it truly breathe. As the woman continues her inner descent, something even more complex begins to unfold, the confrontation between duty and desire. This is the crossroads of her transformation, the moment when everything she has been taught to value collides with everything she secretly longs for. For years, perhaps decades, she has lived by the dictates of duty, to care, to nurture, to keep order, to hold the world together. These duties gave her structure and purpose. They defined her. But now desire, raw, unapologetic, and ancient, rises to challenge that order. And in this tension, a new kind of consciousness is born. Desire here is not limited to the erotic, though it includes it. It is the total movement of the life force, the yearning to feel alive, to experience meaning beyond routine, to express one's essence without fear of rejection. It is the soul's insistence on truth. Jung saw this conflict as essential to individuation, for the psyche cannot evolve while one part dominates the other. The dutiful self, loyal, controlled, and moral, represents the conscious persona, the face she shows the world. Desire represents the unconscious, the instinctual realm that seeks authenticity and freedom. When these two energies clash, the psyche trembles because neither can exist alone. For many women over 40, this confrontation arrives like a storm after long drought. Suddenly, the routines that once felt secure begin to suffocate. The woman finds herself torn between the life she has built and the life that calls to her from within. She may feel guilt for wanting more depth, more passion, more honesty, when she already has what the world deems enough. But the soul does not measure fulfillment in material comfort or social success. It measures it in aliveness. To deny that call is to begin dying while still breathing. This is where the tension becomes most visible in relationships. A woman who begins to honor her desires disrupts the balance of roles that others have come to depend on. The caregiver suddenly seeks care. The listener wants to be heard. The one who maintained harmony now speaks truth, even when it breaks the peace. To her family, this may look like rebellion, even betrayal. But she is not abandoning them. She is attempting to include herself in the circle of love she has always extended outward. In Jungian terms, this is the union of opposites, the integration of eros and logos, of heart and reason, of the feminine and the masculine within. The dutiful self belongs to the realm of logos, order, discipline, structure. Desire belongs to eros, connection, emotion, the pulse of life. When these forces are divided, the psyche fractures. When they begin to unite, the woman's life may appear chaotic, but internally, something miraculous is occurring. She is becoming whole. There is also an unmistakable sexual dimension to this stage. For many women, desire reawakens with startling intensity at midlife. It is not necessarily directed toward a person, it is directed toward life itself. The libido, which Jung described as the energy of the psyche, begins to seek expression beyond the confines of duty. This can take the form of renewed sensuality, creative expansion, or a fierce hunger for experience. The body becomes a messenger, reminding her that she is not a concept or a role, but a living, breathing being infused with divine energy. And yet society still views this hunger with suspicion, labeling it inappropriate, immature, or dangerous. But the danger lies not in the desire, it lies in denying it. For what is denied becomes distorted. What is integrated becomes sacred. Philosophically, this struggle is not merely personal, it is archetypal. It mirrors the eternal human tension between order and chaos, between civilization and instinct. The woman at midlife becomes the stage upon which this drama plays out. She is both priestess and warrior, called to reconcile opposites that have long been divided. And her success in this task determines not only her own freedom, but also the psychic health of those around her. When she chooses to live authentically, she unconsciously grants permission for others to do the same. Still, this path demands great courage. To follow desire after years of duty feels like betrayal, not only of others, but of the identity that has defined her. She must risk being misunderstood, even rejected. But every step she takes toward authenticity is an act of service to the collective soul, for she is dismantling the lie that love requires self-sacrifice. True love, as Jung might say, arises not from suppression, but from the integration of opposites, the harmony between responsibility and joy, giving and receiving, duty and desire. When a woman finally allows both forces to coexist, she becomes radiant with a quiet authority. She is no longer ruled by guilt or fear. She understands that her desire is not an enemy of her love, it is its deepening. Her duty is no longer an obligation. It becomes an expression of her essence, freely chosen rather than unconsciously performed. And so, when we witness a woman in this conflict, torn between her responsibilities and her longing for more, let us not call her selfish or lost. Let us understand that she stands at the threshold of integration, where two halves of her being are learning to dance instead of fight. And then something remarkable happens. After the storms of awakening, after the confrontation with the shadow and the collapse of the false self, after the agonizing tension between duty and desire, there comes a stillness, a silence that feels unfamiliar at first, almost unsettling, because it is not the quiet of suppression but the quiet of truth. In that space, the woman begins to sense herself differently. The chaos she once feared now feels purposeful. The pain she endured begins to reveal its meaning. What looked like destruction was in fact an initiation. She has not gone mad. She has been remade. This is the rebirth of the authentic woman. It is not a return to who she was before the breakdown. That person was necessary but incomplete, a fragment of the larger psyche. Now she emerges as something deeper, fuller and profoundly integrated. Her voice carries a new resonance, her presence a new gravity. She no longer seeks validation, for she has met herself at the level of the soul. The masks have fallen, and what remains is essence, unapologetic, wise and alive. Jung believed that the second half of life is meant for this transformation. In youth, the task is adaptation, learning to function, to build, to belong. But in maturity, the task shifts to individuation, the realization of the self beyond collective expectations. The woman who has crossed through her darkness embodies this principle. She is no longer ruled by external definitions of success, beauty, or goodness. She has outgrown the need to be liked. Instead, she seeks alignment with her instincts, her intuition, her truth. This rebirth is not without scars. She carries the memory of her unraveling, the ache of what she lost and the weight of what she had to let die. But those scars are sacred. They are symbols of initiation. Through them, she has learned what power truly is, not domination, but integration. Power that does not control, but creates. Power that is grounded in self-knowledge, in the unshakable understanding that nothing outside her can grant or take away her worth. Sexually, this rebirth manifests as reclamation. The woman no longer experiences her erotic nature as something to manage or justify. It becomes a channel of vitality, a dialogue between body and soul. Her sexuality is no longer tied to youth or approval. It becomes an expression of presence. She may or may not seek a partner, but she does not seek completion through another because she has found wholeness within herself. Her sensuality becomes a form of spiritual wisdom, a reminder that to be embodied is itself a sacred act. Creatively, too, she comes alive. The same life energy that once fed anxiety or restlessness now fuels creation. Some women paint, write, teach, heal, travel, or simply begin living in ways that feel true rather than expected. Others find new meaning in relationships, re-entering them not as caretakers, but as conscious equals. The outward forms vary, but the inner movement is the same. A turning from imitation toward originality, from compliance toward authenticity. Philosophically, what we witness here is the culmination of the individuation process, the realization that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness. Perfection is sterile. Wholeness is alive. The authentic woman no longer divides herself into good and bad, light and dark, acceptable and forbidden. She embraces her contradictions as necessary expressions of the human condition. In doing so, she becomes a bridge between opposites, a living symbol of integration. The world, however, does not always welcome this transformation. Systems built on conformity find authenticity threatening. The woman who speaks truth disturbs those still invested in illusion. But she is no longer afraid of being misunderstood. She has seen what happens when truth is silenced, and she will not go back. Her presence itself becomes a form of quiet rebellion, a statement that one can live from the soul even in a world that prefers masks. This is why, when people say that women over 40 go crazy, they miss the point entirely. What they call madness is metamorphosis. What they see as rebellion is resurrection. She is not destroying families, she is purifying them, forcing them to evolve beyond pretense to meet her at the level of truth. Her transformation challenges everyone around her to examine their own, and that is the hidden gift of this awakening. The authentic woman does not rise for herself alone. She rises for the collective. Every time she chooses truth over comfort, she expands what is possible for others. Every time she lives from her depths, she lights the path for those still lost in roles and repression. So if you ever meet such a woman, one who has walked through her darkness and now moves with quiet confidence, listen to her. There is ancient wisdom in her gaze, the kind that can only be born through fire. She no longer asks the world who she should be. She simply is.